Thousand Autumns, is a Meng Xi Shi novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 101. The newcomer had plain clothes and unsurpassed elegance, hair drawn up in a top knot with a jade hairpin. Not only Shen Qiao's attention, but also many of the others present were drawn by the sudden appearance of this mystery woman, and were looking in her direction. She wore a long sword on her back, her gaze flying upward. Her walk was not at all girl-like, and unfazed by other people's attention, it remained steadfast and spirited. As she walked in behind the Ch101 disciple, she scanned the entire area. When she saw Shen Qiao, her face showed shock and delight, and before the disciple could bring her before Yi Baikan, she stepped off one foot and flew towards Shen Qiao. Shen Qiao also stood up. Their eyes met. The young woman flung herself like a swallow towards a forest, and embraced him tightly. Everyone's gaze became a bit peculiar. Zhang Jiao Shikshan, the young woman, was completely unaffected, not caring the least about what others might think. Only after a long while, when Shen Qiao patted her on the back, did she let him go. Hearing the namesake she had used, Zhao Qiaying knew that she must be a disciple of Suan Dus Han, Shen Qiao's Shime. As expected, Shen Qiao took her hand and introduced her to Zhao Qiaying. "This is my Wuxia Gu Henbo, this is Wuxia sect Zhao Zongju." Zhao Qiaying had heard before that Qi Fengge had 5 disciples, Tan Yuan Shun, Shen Qiao, Yuai, Yuan Ying, Gu Henbo. Among them was only one woman. It would have to be the one standing before her. Looking at her, she was like ice and jade, enshrouded by a celestial air, truly a beautiful person. Gu and Zhao both greeted each other. Gu Henbo smiled. "I've heard of Zhao Zongju's name, but didn't realize I would meet you here. Wu Niang is very fortunate." It wasn't that she wasn't aware of formalities, just that when she saw Shen Qiao she was so moved, she disregarded everyone else for the moment. Shen Qiao asked, "Wu Niang, how did you come here? Is Yuai here too?" Gu Henbo shook her head. "No, we had a big argument. I've left the mountain for a while now, and wasn't planning to return." Shen Qiao frowned. "What happened? Did he mistreat you?" Gu Henbo smiled, as if it was no big matter. "That's a long story, why don't I tell it later? I heard this place was hosting Shijiandawai, so came up the mountain to check it out, and didn't expect to meet Zhang Jiao Shikshan here." Shen Qiao, hearing the others still refer to him as Zhang Jiao Shikshan, sighed to himself. "Fine, I'll bring you to greet Yi Guanzu first." Gu Henbo didn't object. She became a disciple much later, and there was a large age gap between her and her Shikshan. Qi Fengge, as the Zhangqiao, had many duties to attend, and couldn't personally train his disciples every day. Gu Henbo's Wuzhong was mostly taught by Tan Yuan Shun and Shen Qiao. Between the two, Shen Qiao spent more time with her, so Gu Henbo treated this Shikshan like a brother or father. Their attachment was deep, could not be described as a usual connection between disciples of the same sect. Gu Henbo's appearance was not ordinary, and drew the gaze of many young disciples. Everyone saw that she was close to Shen Qiao, and misunderstood. Yi Baikan was not an exception, and only upon hearing Shen Qiao introduce her did he realize, Qi Zhangjiao was a generation's pride. Even his disciples are so exceptional. To have the luck of meeting you two here, reminds me of Qi Zhangjiao's colors all those years ago. He has everyone's admiration. His conversational skills were very smooth. Seeing Gu Henbo arrive alone, did not press the matter. After exchanging a few words, knowing that Shen Qiao and Gu Hanbo were meeting after a long parting and must have had lots to catch up on, he had someone add another seat next to Shen Qiao, so that the two Shikshan can talk at more length. Shen Qiao and Gu Hanbo returned to their seats. He noticed the latter's attention kept drifting, as if distracted, was alarmed. Wu Niang, what is wrong? Gu Hanbo pulled her focus back, shook her head, nothing, Ace Yong must have suffered these days. While I was traveling around, I often heard news of you. It's partially my fault too. That day on Xuandu's Han, I couldn't see past Yuai's deception, and subjected Ace Yong to this kind of hardship. Shen Qiao, that day, I didn't understand anything. How could you be to blame? It's in the past, there's no meaning to pursuing fault. Why did you and Yuai have an argument? Gu Hanbo, after you fell into the valley, Xuandu's Han was leaderless. Not only was there no chaos, but everything was settled quickly under Yuai's directions. Everything was put to order. Several elders recommended, since your survival was ambiguous, and Xuandu's Han couldn't not have a Zhang Qiao, that Yuai take up this position. That Xuandu's Han didn't fall into chaos, is a good thing. This was the first time that Shen Qiao had heard from a Xuandu's Han disciple the events of that day, its many internal forces. He still didn't understand it too clearly. As Gu Hanbo continued to talk, he had a feeling akin to fog parting. Gu Hanbo, at the time I was ordered to keep watch at Xuandu's Han, so didn't see it with my own eyes. After I heard the news, it was like thunder striking a clear sky, so anxious I didn't know what to do. Thinking about it later, the events were unusual to the point of evil. Zhang Jiao Shikshan, when that thing happened to you, we, including most of the disciples, were all very sad. Only Yuai moved swiftly and decisively, although he wore sadness on his face, but there were inconsistencies everywhere. After this event, there was a time you returned to Xuandu's Han. Yuai couldn't make you stay, and said you were conspiring with people from the demonic sects. De Shikshan was also present, but I wasn't. Later on I saw that De Shikshan appeared to be troubled, quite frightened, so found a chance to talk to him, but he spoke in circles, unwilling to tell the truth. Tan Yuanchun's personality was indecisive and hesitant, and was famous among the Xuandu's Han disciples for being the good guy. Even if he sympathized with Shen Qiao, would not have been able to cut off Yuai. This kind of behavior was not unusual. Gu Hanbo continued carefully, one time, I heard him speaking with Chai Zhanglao. It was like he had long predicted the outcome in the fight between you and Kunyi. My suspicions grew about the inner workings of the whole thing. Yuai was surely hiding something from us. Much later, when the partnership between Xuandu's Han and Tuju was announced, I could no longer sit still, so went to ask Yuai. I asked him if he had been conspiring with Tuju for a long time, whether your fall was related. Shen Qiao shook his head. If you ask it like this, why would he admit it? Gu Hanbo smiled bitterly. Of course he didn't admit it. Not only that, on the surface he tried to console me, but in the middle of the night he entered my room planning to take decisive action. I realized in time, and after fighting him I escaped down the mountain. After that I haven't been back. Shen Qiao thought at length, your Wuzhong isn't bad, but not on Yuai's level. At that time he had control of Xuandu's Han, could have fully blocked your route, but still he let you escape. In his heart there must be a tether to your relationship, and so showed you mercy. Gu Hanbo, even if this were the case, he made you suffer a poisoning and a fall, losing all your Wuzhong. That smidge of compassion, as I see it, is just a cat crying over a dead mouse. De Shikshan may be morally ambiguous, willing to be the accomplice, but I could no longer have a part in it. Shen Qiao, what about Yuan Ying, how is he? Gu Hanbo shook her head. Before I left, I secretly left Si Shikshan a letter explaining things. but I don't know if he read it. After that I left Xuandu's Han, and haven't heard news of him since. As the Shikshanmei talked, several matches were completed. Wang Sanlang was proud and his skills were truly top-notch among the younger generation. After defeating Zhou Yexu, he won several matches in a row. Even Ch Qiao lost to him by one move, for now his victories were unparalleled. Gu Hanbo looked several times at the matches going on, then suddenly said, "No tiger in the mountain, a monkey becomes king, I too will go up against him." Saying this and not waiting for Shen Qiao to stop her, she stepped out, headed directly for her opponent. Her beautiful appearance was already dazzling. At this moment she had attracted the attention of the entire crowd. Towards others Wang Sanlang had no regard, but standing before Gu Hanbo, he looked somewhat humbled, but still spoke with the airs of a rich family heir. "The sword is blind, as to not injure you, why don't we call it a draw?" Gu Hanbo slowly said, "It turns out you didn't come here for a martial arts exchange, but to look at people as if they were something to eat." Wang Sanlang didn't expect such acerbic words to come from her mouth, and felt embarrassed. Of course not. Gu Hanbo drew her sword, "Then let's go." Zhao Qiaying, seeing the two fight, was impressed but also felt this was within expectations. "Your Shimei is extraordinary, renowned teacher, accomplished disciples, just like Shen Daozang, similarly brilliant." "Zhao Zongji flatters us." Shen Qiao murmured. He was thinking that usually Wu Niang was not this impulsive, her actions just now were not like her. Wang Sanlang of course was no match for Gu Hanbo. His long sword was sent flying by Gu Hanbo, and fell into the ground a while away. A Chiniangwan disciple yelled, "Xuandu's Han Gu Hanbo wins against Kuiji Wangzhou." Then everyone knew who Gu Hanbo was. Wang Sanlang appeared a bit pale, not only because he lost, but more because he heard that the other was Chi Feng's disciple. His heart sank, and he couldn't focus for a long time. Gu Hanbo put away her sword and stood still. There was no joy in her expression. She didn't return to Shen Qiao's side, but walked up to Yuan Zixiao, who had her head buried in a bunch of books and scrolls. "Before you were watching Wang Sanlang closely, now that I've defeated him, why won't you even look at me?" Yuan Zixiao didn't raise her head. Her pen continued to move. "You winning against him, isn't that to be expected?" Gu Hanbo laughed icily. "Fang Zhang's Hu Liulagong's people are pretentious. You didn't even say goodbye when you left. Now when we meet again you pretend to not know me. Do I, Gu Hanbo, make you lose so much face?" There was no one around Yuan Zixiao, as to not interfere with her work. Yi Baikan had purposefully had them give her some space. The two were not speaking very loudly, others couldn't overhear it clearly, but seeing their exchange, the two obviously knew each other, but their words and expressions were not happy. At this moment the other two matches had been decided. The winners were Wang Erlang and Chixia Jianpai disciple Chao Yu. Wang Erlang and Chao Yu fought. These days sword style was in vogue. Most Jianghu people used the sword, and the two of them were no exception. Chixia Jianpai was not a big sect, but Chao Yu had already proven himself against so many others. He must have his strengths. Although Wang Erlang's movements were domineering and sword skill superb, he still lost to the other within 200 moves. Wang Erlang wasn't willing to let go of the sword in his hand. His whole body was shaken by the other's inner chi and he retreated several steps, almost fell over. Chao Yu was courteous and flew forward to help him, in case he forced the other into an awkward position. Wang Erlang still wasn't satisfied, although he knew there were always more people out there in the world. Finally he folded his hands in respect, left unhappily. The Kuiji Wang brothers arrived roaring, now had to return crestfallen. To compare their previous disdain in the main hall was like night and day. In the Jianghu where the strong ruled, They who had just ventured from their thatched cottage had not quite adjusted, they had their family background as support, but if they were to rely on Wuzhong, and their Wuzhong wasn't enough, even if it was the emperor holding up the ceiling, they wouldn't be able to lift their heads. Wang Erlang looked to the side where his brother stood, face pale, then he saw Shen Qiao in the distance sitting very still, composed and at ease. He had an impulse to go up to Shen Qiao and ask, when under the gaze of the crowd he lost to Kunyi, that feeling of humiliation, how did bear it? Apart from the Wang brothers themselves, the crowd's attention quickly drifted from them. Qiao Yu did not seek out Gu Hengbo, but instead in the direction of the Qiniangguan disciples he folded his hands and said, Qixia Jianpai Qiao Yu, I don't know if I have the honor of learning from Li Shaoxia. He had challenged Li Qingyu to a fight. Hearing this, everyone was surprised, and one by one turned to Li Qingyu. Qiao Yu's target was clear. Although Gu Hengbo was young, she was Qi Fengge's disciple, in the same generation as Shen Qiao, strictly speaking would be in the same generation as Yi Baikan, and Gu Hengbo rarely made an appearance in the Jianghu. She wasn't widely known. Even if he won against her, not too many people would be surprised, but this wasn't the case with Li Qingyu. Currently, Li Qingyu could be considered the most outstanding of his generation in the Jianghu. First he had sought out Suan Dus Han, losing to Uai by one move. Everyone had heard of this, and later in Su Manor, against Hulagu's disciple Tuju Master Duan Vinyang he fought, also similarly losing by a slight margin, and Duan Vinyang was considered among the top 10 in the world, so by this one can infer that Li Qingyu's Wuzhong, if not in the top 10, wasn't that far behind. To be challenged by name, Li Qingyu had no reason to decline. He picked up his sword, stood up slowly, stepped out from the crowd. Your sword skill is very impressive, but as it stands you cannot hope to win against me within 100 moves, he said to Qiao Yu. No matter how good Qiao Yu's manners were, hearing these words he couldn't help but show his irritation. I respect Li Shaoxia's sword skill, but aren't your words a bit overconfident? He's not wrong, you truly can't match him. Many things, even without a match, can be seen clearly. Yi Guanzu was considering your face and didn't say anything. You need to know your own limitations. This smiling, dripping voice appeared in the crowd, endlessly charming, making people feel as if their bones softened. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice, and saw a woman walking up the stone steps, dignified as lotus, exquisite and elegant. Her tone carried several parts teasing and condescension in contrast to her appearance. The difference between the two, for the moment most people couldn't reconcile. This is. Zhao Qiaying rarely stepped off the mountain, naturally did not know this newcomer's identity. Shen Qiao said gravely, Hehuan sect Zongju Yuan Zai Uxiu. Zhao Qiaying froze. This name was like a bolt of thunder. At the same time, Yi Baikan had stood up. Yuan Zongju has graced us with her presence. This poor one is at fault for greeting you from afar. Please forgive me. Yi Baikan calling the other by her name, many people's expressions changed. The demonic sects were notorious, but if it had been Huanyu sect or Fahing sect appearing, people wouldn't have reacted in this manner, but because Hehuan sect liked extracting yin supplementing yang, using dual cultivation, and in this way caused a lot of wanton deaths, as well their expanding influence to which no one dared interfere. If Hehuan sect was mentioned at all these days, it was with fear. Logically it was not afraid of others. Yuan Xiaoxiu smiled sweetly, it's not your fault you didn't know, since Shijiandawai welcomes everyone, Yi Guanzu wouldn't decline my attendance. The new arrival had no kind intentions, kind people don't arrive. Behind her she had brought numerous disciples, all with names and reputations within Hehuan sect, even in the Jianghu they were known. Yi Baikan slowly said, You are guests, welcome. Yuan Xiaoxiu laughed, that's great, I recognize many old friends here, what a coincidence, I heard people complaining that our Hehuan sect was too domineering, and were trying to work together to deal with us, is this true or false, Yi Guanzu, what do you think? If Yi Baikan were to say it was true, he would fall into the trap, if he were to deny it, it would appear a bit contradictory, others would certainly suspect his abilities. The other's purpose was clearly to wreak havoc. Hearing the question, many people showed their indignation, but because of Hehuan sect's threatening demeanor they didn't dare open their mouths. At this moment, someone spoke up, on this matter we shouldn't tire out Yi Guanzu by forcing his words, this poor one will reply on his behalf. Yuan Zongju, your question, surely was asked with a guilty conscience, do you also agree that Hehuan sect's actions have been untoward, are you afraid of public resentment, and to prevent a forest fire, you rushed up the mountain to put out the flames? The voice was steady and warm, made people feel safe, but was not overly forceful. Yi Baikan understood, as the host of Shijiandawai, and head of Chinianglan, his various roles made it difficult to reply. Shen Qiao, choosing this moment to speak, was not to show off, but to help him, he shot him a grateful glance. Yuan Xiaoxiu laughed coldly, Shen Daozang is so brave, you killed 2 elders from my sect, I haven't sought you out yet, and you dare approach me first. That is strange, why can't your Hehuan sect people be killed? Unfortunately when Shen Daozang killed them I was not present, otherwise I would have shouted my encouragement and cheered. Everyone here, if you're really going to make an alliance against Hehuan sect, you should include us Huanyu sect, as I see it, Shen Daozang is held in high regard, and is most suited to be the head of the alliance. Again, another person abruptly inserted themselves into the conversation, along with these words, a youth twirling a fan appeared on the stone steps. And who might be this lordship? Shen Qiao suddenly had a headache. End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.